She left me when I was dying. But I turned my pain into power. Now, the world knows the truth she tried to bury. The hospital corridor smelled faintly of antiseptic and stale coffee. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the dull linoleum floor as I sat on the edge of the examination table. The doctor's words still echoed in my ears like a slow-moving storm. It's cancer. My mind had gone numb, unable to absorb the details about stages, treatment, plans or percentages. All I knew was that my life had just shifted onto a road I never imagined I'd walk. My phone buzzed on the chair beside me. For a brief second, a flicker of hope sparked in my chest. I thought it was her, my wife Sarah, checking in to say she was on her way, that we would face this together like we always promised we would. We had been married for 6 years, through house moves, job changes, and late-night whispers about the future. She always said love meant being there, in sickness and in health. But as I unlocked the screen, my heart sank. The message was short, brutally short. I didn't sign up for this. I'm sorry, but I can't do this with you. Don't try to contact me. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the words, reading them again and again, hoping the letters would rearrange themselves into something else, something kinder, something human, but they didn't. The cold glow of the screen burned into my eyes as if branding the moment into my memory forever. A rush of emotions clawed at my chest. Confusion, betrayal, despair, and beneath it all, a strange, quiet rage. This wasn't just about leaving. This was abandonment at my weakest hour. The woman who vowed to stand beside me had turned her back the moment life became hard. I pressed the phone to my forehead, trying to breathe. The nurse entered briefly, murmured something about scheduling my next appointment, and left again. Her voice was a distant echo. My thoughts were a roaring sea. That night, I went home to an empty house. Her things were gone. Half the closet, cleared, drawers stripped bare. Even her favorite mug, the one with the chipped handle, was missing. She had planned this. While I was waiting for test results, she must have been packing. I sat on the couch with the silence pressing in from all sides. The clock ticked too loudly. Every corner of the room seemed to whisper her absence. I imagined her somewhere else. Maybe, in a warm apartment across town, maybe already laughing with someone else, free from the burden of my sickness. The next few days blurred into one another. Doctor visits, endless pamphlets about chemotherapy, bland meals I barely touched. But through it all, her message burned like a brand on my skin. Not once did she call to check in. Not once did she ask how I was doing. And that's when something inside me began to shift. The pain was still there, of course it was. But behind it, a harder edge started to form. I began to remember things I had ignored before. Her sudden late nights at yoga, the whispered phone calls in the kitchen, the way she had been unusually interested in my life insurance policy a few months back. Had she known about my diagnosis before I did? Had she seen my weakness coming and decided to cut her losses? I started digging, quietly, patiently. It's amazing what you can uncover when no one expects you to fight back. Bank records showed unusual transfers. Small amounts at first, then larger ones, moved into an account I didn't recognize. Messages on our shared cloud storage hinted at another man, someone from her office, someone who had been in the background for months. The betrayal deepened, but so did my resolve. One night, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of bitter coffee, I made a decision. I wasn't going to waste what time I had left drowning in her choices. If she thought my diagnosis made me weak, she was wrong. I still had strength, just not the kind she expected. I called my lawyer the next morning. My voice was calm, almost too calm, as I explained the situation. We went over my rights, the assets in both our names, and the legal steps I could take. It turned out that while she had been planning her exit, I still held the keys to parts. of our life she had overlooked, and that's when the seed of a plan was planted. I would let her think she had won. I would let her enjoy her freedom, her clean break, her imagined future without me. But beneath the surface, I would start to untangle our shared finances, transfer what was legally mine, and prepare the papers she would never see coming. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity. A week after her message, I received another notification. She had officially filed for separation. The gall of it almost made me laugh. She hadn't even called to explain. Just documents, sent through a lawyer, cold and transactional, as if 6 years of my life were just a line item to be closed. But that was fine, because by then, I wasn't the man sitting numb in the doctor's office anymore. I was someone else, someone sharper, quieter, more deliberate. I folded the papers neatly and set them aside. Outside, rain streaked the window, and the reflection of my own tired face stared back at me. I whispered to myself, barely audible, "You just signed the wrong contract, Sarah." For the first time since the diagnosis, a faint smile tugged at the corner of my lips. The game had only just begun. The first real morning of clarity came a week after the separation papers arrived. I stood in front of the mirror, pale and worn, the shadow of a man I used to be. But behind those tired eyes, something steady had started to burn. I wasn't going to fade quietly. Not for her. Not for anyone. Cancer had taken a lot already. My peace of mind, my appetite, the stability of my marriage. But it had given me something else too. Perspective. Stripped of illusions, I saw the world more clearly than ever before. And I realized that survival wasn't just about medicine or treatments. It was about control. I began with the bank accounts. Sarah had always handled the day-to-day finances, but the larger investments and the mortgage were in both our names. I visited the bank, armed with every document I could find. The manager, a tired-looking man with rimless glasses, listened as I explained the situation. There was no anger in my voice, only precision. I wanted everything frozen. Until the divorce. Terms were final. Neither of us would make large withdrawals or transfers without mutual consent. It worked. She wouldn't know it yet, but the little pool of money she had started to siphon off would soon run dry. Next, I called my lawyer again. His name was Martin, an old family contact, sharp as a razor when it came to messy separations. "She's already moving things," I told him over the phone. "I want to know how far she's gone and what I can protect." He chuckled darkly. "You're not the first man I've seen wake up after being blindsided," he said. "You're doing the right thing by acting early." Acting early, that became my mantra. I started documenting everything. Her transfers, her messages, even photos of the house before she left. I didn't want to ruin her. I wanted the truth laid bare. I wanted everyone who mattered, her family, our mutual friends, the court, to see who she really was when it counted. Meanwhile, my treatments began. Chemotherapy was as brutal as they warned. The nausea came in waves, the fatigue was bone deep, but every session was another step toward survival. I remember sitting in that recliner, IV in my arm, scrolling through her social media. There she was, smiling at a rooftop party, her arm linked with a man I didn't recognize, the city skyline glowing behind them. The caption read, "New beginnings, new beginnings." While my body fought for its life, she was already living, hers. One evening, in the middle of a particularly bad round of sickness, I got a call from a mutual friend, Anna. She hesitated before speaking. "I don't know if I should tell you this, but Sarah's been talking. She said you're being dramatic about your condition, that you're using it to make her feel guilty." I clenched my jaw so hard it ached. "Thank you, Anna," I said quietly. That's all I needed to know. That night, I made my first real move. I drafted a letter, not to her, but to her employer. Sarah worked in a mid-sized marketing firm, one that took pride in its family values and community reputation. I wrote as her husband, laying out the truth. How she abandoned me within hours of my diagnosis. How she siphoned funds. How she had been using company time and resources to plan her new life. I attached the relevant bank screenshots, the timestamps, the text that started it all. I didn't demand action. I simply informed them. 2 days later, she called me for the first time since she left. Her voice was tight, almost panicked. "What did you do?" she hissed. I said nothing for a long moment. Then calmly I replied, "I thought you didn't sign up for this." The silence that followed was almost satisfying. She hung up without another word. From there, the cracks in her new life began to widen. Her company started an internal review. The man she had been seeing, I learned through a private investigator, was one of her managers, married, with children. Their little secret office romance had just become a liability. I didn't stop there. I made sure her family knew. Not out of spite, but because for years they had seen me as the devoted husband, the dependable one. They deserved to know what she had done when things turned dark. One evening, her sister messaged me on Facebook. "I'm so sorry, I had no idea. It wasn't much, but it was a start. People were beginning to see." All the while, I kept up with my treatments. I forced myself to eat, to walk, to breathe through the worst days. The doctors said my prognosis was uncertain, but that wasn't new to me anymore. Life was uncertain. Trust was uncertain. But resolve, that was mine to command. As the weeks passed, Sarah grew quieter. The late-night calls stopped. The legal letters from her side became less confident, less demanding. I heard through a friend that her affair had ended, that her reputation at work was in tatters, that the people she once leaned on were stepping back, unsure whose side to take. And I stayed still. Because real revenge, I realized, wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was patient. It was watching the person who abandoned you slowly discover that actions have weight, that the world is smaller than they thought, and their choices echo louder than they expected. By the end of the second month, I was different again. Thinner, yes. A little paler, maybe. But harder, steadier, and strangely at peace. I had stopped waiting for her to call. I had stopped replaying her message in my head. I had begun, quietly, to think about what came next. Not just for her, but for me. Because survival was no longer my only goal. I wanted to build something new. Something stronger than the ruins she left behind. 3 months after the day she walked out, the man in the mirror no longer looked like a victim. The hollows in my cheeks were still there, but my eyes had changed. They were sharp now, calculating. The storm that had hit me was still raging, but I was no longer clinging to debris. I was building a raft. By then, the divorce proceedings had begun to tilt in my favor. My lawyer, Martin, had uncovered enough discrepancies in her financial movements to challenge her credibility. The emergency transfers she made before leaving me, money funneled into a separate account, were documented and presented. The court didn't look kindly on such actions, especially when the spouse left behind was undergoing critical medical treatment. Sarah, once smug and dismissive, had grown cautious. The confident messages turned to clipped replies, and finally, to silence. I could feel her slipping, her hold on our shared narrative unraveling thread by thread. And then came the unexpected call from her company's HR department. "Mr. Hayes," the woman said carefully, "we are conducting a formal inquiry regarding some conduct concerns. We would appreciate your cooperation if needed." I agreed without hesitation. I didn't need to embellish anything. The facts were already corrosive enough. Her affair had become an open secret, her professional image tarnished. She had walked out on me thinking she was stepping into freedom. Instead, she had walked into a cage of her own making. During this time, something unexpected happened. I started to heal, not just my body, but my sense of self. The treatments, harsh as they were, began to show results. My oncologist smiled, more often during our meetings. "Your body's responding," he said. "Keep going, don't give up." I didn't. Every day became a ritual. Exercise when I could, work remotely for the consultancy I had been neglecting, and piece together the future brick by brick. For the first time in months, I began to think about life after cancer. Not just survival, but purpose. Part of that purpose involved something Sarah never imagined: reclaiming what was rightfully mine. I met with an old acquaintance, a real estate developer named Victor. He had always admired the small but promising property portfolio Sarah and I had built together. "She's desperate to liquidate her share," I told him over coffee. "She wants out fast before the divorce settles." He grinned. Desperation makes for good deals. Within weeks, we arranged a buyout, but on my terms. She sold her half for a fraction of its worth, thinking she was cutting ties cleanly. She didn't know that the deal was structured to give me full ownership once the paperwork was finalized. Every move she made to free herself only tightened the web. One rainy afternoon, I drove past the old house we once shared. The garden was overgrown, the curtains drawn, the driveway empty. It was a symbol of what had died between us, and what I was leaving behind. I no longer wanted that life, or her shadow hanging over it. But I did want the truth to come out. And so, when the local paper reached out, having caught wind of the workplace scandal and the whispers about her abandonment, I gave them my side of the story, not with anger, not with slander, just the facts. A wife who walked away the day her husband's world collapsed, and a husband who fought back, not for vengeance, but for dignity. The article went viral in our small city. Comments flooded in, some cruel, some sympathetic. But the tide had turned. She was no longer the glamorous independent woman starting new beginnings. She was the one who had left a man battling cancer for a fleeting affair. Her messages returned then, desperate and defensive. "You didn't have to do this," one read. "You've ruined my life," said another. I stared at them, feeling neither pity nor triumph, only clarity. "I didn't ruin your life," I finally replied. "You just finally started living the one you built." That night, I slept better than I had in months. As my strength returned, I started traveling. Small trips at first, to the countryside, to meet clients, to breathe air that didn't taste like hospital corridors. Everywhere I went, I carried the weight of what I had endured, but it no longer felt like an anchor. It was a reminder. One evening, as the sun set over a quiet lake, Martin called with the news I had been waiting for. "She's withdrawing her claims," he said. "Her lawyer sent a revised proposal. You keep the assets, she takes a modest settlement, and she wants it done quietly." I closed my eyes, listening to the wind ripple over the water. "Quietly," I repeated. "Of course she does." But there was nothing quiet about what came next. I signed the papers. Yes. I agreed to the settlement. Yes. But I also took the final step of putting my story into words. Not a tabloid piece this time, but a book proposal, a memoir, about survival, betrayal, and the kind of strength you only discover when someone tries to take everything from you. And this time I used her name, because the truth I had learned isn't revenge. It's exposure. Sarah would move on, perhaps start over again in another city, another company, another life. But she would always know what she did. And the world would too. As for me, I was already looking beyond her shadow. The treatments were working. My business was recovering. And for the first time since the message that shattered my life, I felt something close to gratitude, not for her betrayal, but for the fire it lit. The day the divorce was finalized, the sky was bright and unremarkable. Neither stormy nor sunny, just a day like any other. Yet to me, it felt like the air itself had shifted. A weight I had carried for months finally lifted, leaving behind not emptiness, but space. Space for something new. The settlement went through quietly, as she wanted. Her share of the properties had already been liquidated at a fraction of their true worth. The house, our house, was sold, and the proceeds funded something she never imagined, the first phase of my own company. A consultancy firm built on honesty and resilience, a reflection of everything she had failed to value. She didn't attend the final hearing. Her lawyer sent word that she had moved out of state, pursuing a fresh start. I didn't care to ask where. Her absence was no longer a wound. It was a relief. Cancer had changed me. It stripped me of illusions, of permanence, of loyalty, of promises written in the haze of better times. But it also gave me a gift: clarity. I knew now what mattered, who mattered, and what I would never allow again. The first public event I attended after my recovery was a charity gala for cancer survivors. They invited me to speak. I stood before a hall of strangers, lights glaring, microphones catching every breath, and I told my story, not to humiliate her, not to court pity, but to remind others like me that being abandoned is not the end of your story. It's the beginning, I said, voice steady. When someone leaves you at your weakest, they are showing you their truest strength. And it's not loyalty, it's not courage, it's fear. But you have the chance to become stronger than you ever imagined. The applause was polite, but the eyes, those who knew that pain, burned with recognition. After the gala, a woman approached me, not young, not old, with a kind of presence that filled a room. "You've been through hell," she said simply, "and you didn't just survive, you built something from it." Her name was Elise, a writer, a survivor herself. We talked, that night for hours, about scars, about trust, about the strange freedom of losing everything you thought you needed. Weeks turned into months. The book proposal I had drafted turned into a manuscript, with Elise's help. She knew how to pull the pain into words, how to turn the silence into something that could heal others. The publisher called it raw, brutal, necessary. They offered a deal. By the time the book hit the shelves, I had learned a truth I once resisted. Revenge isn't about destroying someone. It's about refusing to let them destroy you. Sarah's name was in the book, not out of spite, but because the truth deserved to breathe. She sent one last message after its release: "You've ruined any chance I had to rebuild." I stared at it for a long moment, then replied with the only words that felt honest: "I didn't ruin it. I revealed it. What you do with it now, that's on you." There was no reply. Life, as it tends to do, began to fill with new routines. My health stabilized. The cancer was in remission. I traveled, I spoke, I mentored those going through the same dark tunnel I once walked, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, I started to laugh again. One autumn afternoon, standing on the balcony of my new apartment overlooking the city skyline, I realized something extraordinary. I no longer wished to undo the past. Not because it didn't hurt. It had carved deep, permanent marks into me. But because without it, I would still be the man waiting for someone else to save him. Now, I knew how to save myself. Elise walked out onto the balcony, 2 mugs of tea in her hands. "You're quiet," she said, smiling. "Just thinking," I murmured. "About how sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is the thing that sets you free." She handed me a mug. "And sometimes," she added, "the people who walk away are the ones who were never meant to stay." I nodded, watching the sun sink below the city. Somewhere out there, Sarah was starting over, just as I was. But our paths no longer crossed. Not in courtrooms, not in silence, not in memory. The chapter was closed, and for the first time in a long, brutal year, I felt ready to begin a new one.